More than 100 people are on the autism spectrum, and there are around 700,000 autistic adults and children in the UK. And students with ASC are twice as likely to be excluded from mainstream school. So this is why in today's episode, we are diving into topics that are crucial for creating an inclusive classroom. So we're going to be looking at how to support students with ASC, which is Autism Spectrum Condition, and also going to learn a little bit about that change in terminology, because you might be thinking, I thought it was ASD, not ASC. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then most importantly, how we can support students from a practical level, looking at effective strategies. So whether you're looking for new ways to enhance your classroom environment or simply want to better understand the needs of the neurodiverse students, this episode is packed with useful tips, and you'll also have the opportunity to download in the description below my free PDF one-page help sheet for how you can best support ASC students. Hey there teachers, welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where every week I dive into all the tips and tricks that make teaching life so much easier. Whether you're a veteran educator, an early career teacher learning the ropes, or balancing the classroom with being a busy parent, this will help you streamline your workload and bring a bit more balance to your life. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell. Hey everyone, and welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast that helps teachers streamline their workload, boost productivity and enhance their teaching skills. I'm Miss Estruch, or Katie, and today we're kicking off the second part of this special mini SEND series with an episode all about supporting students on the autism spectrum. You might have heard the term ASD in the past, but nowadays the more inclusive term is ASC, which is Autism Spectrum Condition. And this shift is part of a broader understanding of neurodiversity and reflects a more person-centered approach to teaching and supporting students. So what we're going to be going through in this episode today is, what is ASC and why is it now known as ASC rather than ASD? How students with ASC might present in the classroom and the impact it has on their learning. And then finally, what you as a teacher can do to create an inclusive environment and support these students both in the classroom and with their homework. Plus, I'll be sharing my resource giveaway, which this time is a free one-page PDF looking at different strategies for how you can help your students who might have ASC. But before we dive into ASC, let's have our usual quick coffee catch up. And oh my gosh, can you believe it? I'm actually having a coffee in the episode today. I keep having squash, but I've managed to film earlier in the day, hence it being a bit dark and gloomy still, but I thought I'm just going to get on and film. So how's my week been? I've actually had an offer that I've accepted on my flat. It's looking a little bit precarious though, so fingers crossed it doesn't fall through. I've also been in holiday booking mode, and I've just booked a 3-day trip to Riga in Latvia for February. And this is actually part of my mission to travel to 40 countries before I turn 40. And I think I'd worked it out that by the end of this year, I should be at 37 or 38 countries, and I'm 37 at the moment. But I actually thought I'd been to Cyprus with my family when we were really young, and my parents told me this week that, no, Katie, we have never been to Cyprus. I was like, oh no, that means I'm one back on my country list, and that's another one I have to try and fit in. The reason I say, oh no, is because it's become quite a laborious mission. My partner keeps saying to me, I can't wait for your 40 by 40 to be done so we can actually start going to countries that you want to go to, not just go to new countries. But the whole concept was, I felt that I kept going to the same countries over and over, and I wasn't experiencing new countries and going to places I'd never normally consider. So that's why I set this challenge, and it has been amazing for that, because so many of the countries I visited would never have been top of my list, and I've absolutely loved my time with them. Anyway, let me know how your week has been, but let's jump into the main content then for today. So what is Autism Spectrum Condition, or ASC for short? It's a developmental disorder that affects how individuals perceive the world and interact with others. The spectrum is wide, meaning that every individual on the spectrum experiences it differently, and there's not one set, this is what it looks like and this is how a student might behave. So it's important to note that ASC isn't a condition that someone can grow out of, it is lifelong. However, with the right support, students with ASC can excel in different areas of life, including education, which is why I think it's so important for us as teachers to be educated and aware on how we can best support students with ASC. So why is it now known as ASC instead of ASD? Because when I did my teacher training, it was always ASD. And then more recently, when I've had training at my school, it's shifted to ASC. So ASD is Autism Spectrum Disorder. It's now more commonly known as Autism Spectrum Condition. And this is a significant shift reflecting the growing understanding of neurodiversity. And this change is to emphasize that autism is a condition, not a disorder. So it allows for a more positive, strengths-based approach to teaching students on the spectrum. And using the term ASC encourages us to view these students as individuals with unique needs rather than them being disordered. So by making this shift, we can recognize the diversity within students and within the autism spectrum, appreciating the variety of experiences and challenges students may face. And it's about creating a more inclusive and accepting educational environment. So how does ASC present in the classroom? Students on the ASC spectrum may experience a range of characteristics, which can sometimes be misunderstood if we aren't aware of the signs. And they could be misinterpreted as behavior issues rather than they are just seeing and experiencing the world in a different way to us. So these characteristics often include social and communication differences. And that could be difficulty with verbal and non-verbal communication, interpreting social cues, and even making eye contact. So if you are potentially talking to a class and maybe giving them a look to imply you need to be listening now or you need to be behaving, that might not be interpreted in that way by a student with ASC. Sensory sensitivities is also another aspect to consider. Students on the ASC spectrum can be very oversensitive or undersensitive to sensory input. So things like lights or sound or textures or smells. So it's really important to be aware of in your classroom, do you have a light, for example, that might flicker? Or do you have a sound? Do you have a radiator that slightly buzzes? Or does your projector slightly buzz? Is there a particular smell in your lab, maybe if you're doing science at practical, that might be quite potent? All of these things might be mildly distracting or annoying to someone who doesn't have ASC, but someone who does have ASC, this could be so overwhelming because they're so oversensitive to it that they cannot think of anything else. Next then is rigid thinking and routines. So for example, preferences for the sameness and resistant to change in routines or environments. And the example that I was given in the past for a student that I taught with ASC was if we were saying you are going to have a test in this lesson and then for whatever reason that changed, that would throw that student so significantly that they then wouldn't want to be at the lesson at all because they were told we're doing this in this lesson and now you've changed it. And it was the same thing with, oh, we're actually going to a computer room today, or we're actually doing a practical and I hadn't told you. To a student who doesn't have ASC, this might just be, oh, this is exciting, this is different. To someone with ASC, that could be so jarring because it wasn't what they've been building themselves up to and expecting that, like I said, they might just not want to be in the lesson. And that's what I experienced with one of my students. And I then had to make sure that if I was doing a computer room lesson, a practical, a test, I told this student a week in advance and I did not change what I had planned. Number 4 then is special interests. And this could be an intense focus on specific topics or activities, which can be either a strength or a challenge in the classroom, depending what it is that you're teaching. And then challenges with emotional regulations as well. So students with ASC might have difficulty managing emotions or reacting to situations in ways that might seem disproportionate to you. And this is where I think in particular it could maybe be misinterpreted as a student deliberately trying to break rules or having behavior issues. Also that concept of the rigid thinking and sticking to routines. If you change it, they then just flat out refuse to come to the lesson. That can sometimes be misinterpreted as deliberately being difficult or having these behavioral challenges that a student might be choosing to do. And this is why we see twice as many students with ASC getting excluded from mainstream school than non-ASC students, or at least some of the contributing factors to that fact. impact. So understanding these behaviours and traits allows us to provide more appropriate support. So if we are aware that a student isn't behaving in this way deliberately, they're not trying to be disruptive or disrespectful or go against what you have asked them to do. This is just how their brain interprets the world, and they don't have control over how they're feeling about it and how they process and perceive everything. Knowing that for you as a teacher can help, first of all, in the way that you respond and react, realizing that this isn't something they're choosing to do to be disruptive, and we can understand that, take a step back and then respond to them in a different way. And that's what we're now going to look at. What are the different ways that you could respond? How can you better support students so maybe they are more comfortable in the classroom? They don't feel this need to escape that classroom because it's making them feel so uncomfortable. Now, in terms of the impact that this is having on students with ASC, I've briefly touched on it already. The fact that we have approximately twice as many students with ASC being excluded, that is obviously going to impact their learning. And for students with ASC, challenges with communication, social interactions, sensory processing can directly impact their learning experience, but also their enjoyment of lessons and how comfortable and welcome they might feel in your classroom. They might struggle with group work. They might need additional time to process information or experience sensory overload in a busy classroom. Imagine with group work. This was another thing that one of the students that I taught with ASC really struggled with, because again, it's a change from the norm. You're suddenly being told you're going to be in a situation now with social interactions because you're now working as a group. Not only that, with the group work, there's that pressure of the social interaction. Group work results in a noisier classroom. And if you are highly sensitive to sounds and suddenly the whole classroom is so noisy that it overwhelms your hearing and you can't hear anything, just that loud buzz and noise of students talking, then it's completely understandable that someone might shut off, not engage, or just leave the classroom altogether. So group work is another thing to be really considerate about. If you do have a student with ASC, it might be a discussion with them, their parents or guardians. Are they able to work as groups, or would it be better for that class that maybe if you have to do group work, stick to two, have it as a pair. And if you don't have to have group work, then don't. It's not going to be something that is best for that student, and we need to think of the class as a whole. And there's plenty of other things you can do for all students that are beneficial that isn't group work. Another way it could impact their learning is students with ASC might have a tendency to focus on detail rather than the big picture. And that can be beneficial in some areas of maybe really understanding the fine details of a maths equation or a concept in biology. But what it might mean is they aren't as able to approach application questions if they can't see the subject holistically and see how things link together. So it's important for us to try and adapt our teaching strategies to harness the students' strengths and support them in areas that they might find more challenging, like that holistic, big picture thinking. So let's get to the quick fire. How can we support students on the ASC spectrum? I know I've given some examples already, which is actually based on my personal experience as well as the research, but here are 9 more strategies. Number 1 is making sure you have clear and direct communication. So make sure you are using simple, straightforward language, and whatever you are saying, you have a visual aid behind you to reinforce the instructions. Making sure that you have maybe a bullet point list of instructions. You also have a diagram that represents it, as well as you straightforward, very clear and to the point with your explanation. And you might have seen my last week's episode on dyslexia. This was exactly the same strategy, or one of the same strategies to help students with dyslexia. And that's what I was saying. Although we might be focusing on one particular special educational need, by implementing these strategies, we shouldn't be thinking that, oh, it's something extra I now have to consider just to support maybe one student out of 100 that I teach, because actually what you are implementing could help someone with a different special educational need. Also, it's going to help all students. So yes, sometimes these changes are more effort, more consideration, changes to what you already have in place, but it is to help not just one student, it should help the whole class. Number 2 is having a structured environment. So provide a predictable routine with visual schedules or charts showing what is coming up next in the lesson. So one strategy that I've used with this is, if you are using PowerPoint, you can actually just have a bar at the top of your PowerPoint that can be boxes showing everything coming up this lesson. So it could be box number 1 says starter, then we have information explained, then questions, then it could be worksheet activity, then it might be information explained, worksheet activity, assembly, and then also plenary. Have that across the top through every single slide and have in bold or in a different color what you're currently doing. So if you're currently doing the starter box would be in a different color to show this is what's coming up this lesson, this is what we're currently doing. So you have that clear structure, predictable what's going to happen in the lesson, and so the students know exactly what's going on. Now that is going to help all students to have this predictable, knowing what's going to happen, knowing where we're at in the lesson. Then we've got number 3, sensory considerations. So as I talked about, be aware of those sensory triggers. If a student does feel overwhelmed because of the loudness, the smell that might be there, you can't really control if a student is wearing strong perfume. You can tell them maybe don't do that next lesson, but there and then you can't control it. So try and offer, if you start to see the student might be becoming overwhelmed, a potential quiet space. Or one thing that the student that I taught had was noise cancelling headphones. So she would wear her noise cancelling headphones for pretty much the entire lesson. And that is why it was so important for me to have whatever I was saying reinforced as writing on the board as well, so that if she couldn't hear me because she had the noise cancelling headphones on, she could at least still read it. And then I would go in and touch base with her and just check, do you know which bit we're up to? And then she'd just quickly take off one of her ears of the headphones. I could talk to her, she'd put it back on, and that's how we overcame the noisiness of the class. Number 4 is positive reinforcement. Reinforcing positive behaviours with clear rewards and praise, focusing on what the student is doing well, is going to be really boosting and helpful for these students, plus all students in general. Number 5, social skills training. So encourage opportunities for the students to practice social skills in a safe, structured environment. So this could be, you might do pair work, but deliberately let them pair with someone that is their friend, someone that they're comfortable with, so they can start to build their confidence in pair work rather than independent work with a student that they get on with and feel safe with. Or if they have a teaching assistant, it could be that they are always paired with their teaching assistant, and it doesn't have to be with another student. Number 6 is provide extra time. So if you are going to be setting a task, try and allow extra time for tasks that require processing, especially in assessments. And the student might be entitled to extra time in an assessment anyway, so that would be something that you would be giving them automatically. If you're thinking about a particular set of activities they're doing in the lesson, is there a way that you can give them a little bit longer to take into account that they might have to process the information first, or it might just take them longer if they're feeling overwhelmed by all the other sensory stimulations. Number 7, I briefly talked about on number 5, but this is the concept of peer support, making sure, even if it's not a paired task, allow them to sit with, if you do have typical seating plans. If you don't, then this is null and void. If you have a strict seating plan, make sure that you are sat them with someone that is understanding, is aware, and maybe is their friend that they can have positive social interactions with to make them feel more comfortable in your lesson, therefore more likely to engage and to learn, and less likely to feel the need to have to leave your lesson. Number 8 is trying to foster special interests. So if you know this student does have a particular interest, try and use that student's interest to create learning opportunities that are engaging and motivating and make them more excited about your subject. And number 9, for some students, it may be that the use of technology can really help. So leverage any assistant technologies like speech to text apps or visual organizers to support learning. So one of your students may be entitled to use a tablet or a laptop, for example. So those are 9 strategies I highly recommend you reflect on your current practice. How many of those do you already do? How many of them do you do, but you think you can maybe tweak and do them slightly differently or to a different degree? And how many had you not considered at all that you can now implement? None of the ones that I've said are particularly onerous or going to take you much time. It's just about thinking about it each time you have your lesson, whether you are following those good practices. So, quick win of the week. This week's quick win, I want to introduce you to a website that is a goldmine for supporting neurodiverse students, especially those with Autism Spectrum Condition. And this is the website Autism Education Trust. And I'll link it in the description below. They have a wealth of free resources, including training modules, so you can get trained by an expert. I'm no expert. I've just done research that I'm sharing with you, and I'm sharing my own personal experiences. They also have lesson plans, practical tips for students with autism as well. So visit that link below. They offer a range of materials that can really transform your approach to support these students. Following on from that, the resource roundup of the week. I'm excited to be able to give you yet another one-page PDF help guide. As I said with the dyslexia one, I want to be able to give you a really quick and easy, digestible information sheet that you can take away for free to reflect on in maybe a month's time when you've forgotten everything that I might have said in this podcast. So I've done the research for you, so you don't have to do hours researching, and I've deliberately made it one page because I know you're so overwhelmed with your workload already that this is a quick sheet for you with no waffle to be able to find what you need. So that's it for this week. I hope you found episode 2 of this mini series to do with SEND helpful, and to gain a deeper understanding of ASC and how we can better support students on the spectrum in the classroom. And these strategies might be small changes that could make a huge difference to a student's experience of school and their end result in terms of grades. So don't forget to download that free PDF and get that handy list of top 10 strategies to help you. Remember, inclusivity is not a one-time effort, but an ongoing process that we can all contribute to. So thank you for tuning in to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell. Hopefully I'll see you next week, where we'll be continuing the SND series. This time it will be focusing on ADHD and how we can support students with ADHD in the classroom. So I'll see you then. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell.